Before I introduce our four amazing panelists and our moderator, I do first want to thank our session sponsor, Cindy Woolman from Bookshire Hathaway Home Services, whose support helps us make these sessions possible. And now I'm going to spend about 10 minutes because I know you're really here to listen to the panelists, but I would like to give a broad overview of kind of the economic state of women and girls in our region and our country, and why Women's Way is investing so much resources into addressing the gender wealth gap. Just briefly, Women's Way is the leading nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of women, girls, and gender equity. And we were the first umbrella funding federation in the United States specifically dedicated to women's issues. So we've been around for about 43 years. And unfortunately, we're still around trying to fight the fight to achieve equity for all women. So what is the economic state of women? I'm sure a lot of you have heard so much about this in the news. We can't get away from it, particularly with COVID. But before COVID, women and children were nationally 73% of the poor. In Philadelphia, at the highest poverty rate at just above 25% among the 10 largest cities, and the region's largest demographic group living in poverty were women, ages between 25 to 34. And often when women are poor, children are poor. So over 37% of our children were poor in our city. Before COVID, racial disparities in housing security has existed since the existence of our country for the past 400 years. So before COVID, there was a 20 to 30% gap between Black and white ownership rates, and they have persisted more than 100 years, despite Black ownership has increased in the mid-1900s. And the average Black homeowner likely owns more mortgage debt than their white counterparts on a house with less value. And this has to do, and the panelists will talk about this, about the many biases and discriminatory practices against particularly people of color. In Philadelphia, half of all renters and nearly 1 in 3 homeowners are cost burdened, which means that more than 30% of their income goes towards paying rent. And of those, 46% are non-Hispanic Black households and 50% are Hispanic Latinx households. There are nearly twice as many low-income renter households as the number of housing units they can afford. And this came out of the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities Land Just report. So there's a housing shortage crisis. This has been happening long before COVID. And then COVID hit, and it's just made the situation worse, particularly for women, particularly for Black and brown women. Nationally, 2.5 million women have lost their jobs or dropped out of the workforce. In December alone, 140,000 Americans dropped out of the workforce. 100% were Black and Latinx women. And part of the reasons is that women account for 74% of employment and high contact occupations that was disproportionately impacted by COVID. There's also a lack of a childcare infrastructure or family forward workplace policies in our country. We have actually one of the worst childcare systems in terms of advanced countries. And many small business owners are women, and 1 in 4 businesses closed their doors by April 1st of 2020. So women, particularly Black and brown women, have really been hit hard by COVID, and we'll talk about the impact it's made on housing security as well. So after COVID, and this came from 2 reports at the bottom, during the summer of 2020, 24% of Philadelphians have fallen behind in rent and mortgage payments. Majority were Latinx and Black residents. And only 32% believe their rent is affordable, 32. And between March and December 2020, landlords filed to evict more than 2,700 families in Philadelphia. 77% were in communities of color, and 48% were in majority Black communities. So yes, we're in a housing crisis. It was a housing crisis before, and it's gotten worse. So when paired with a global pandemic, we anticipate a national wave of homelessness that will be unstoppable if landlords retain control of Philadelphia. This was a quote that came out of the Philadelphia Renters Report by Community Legal Services, a daunting quote. And then another quote: if conditions for families do not improve, and if levels of maternal labor force participation and work hours experienced during the pandemic persist, lost wages would amount to over $64 billion per year. So you can argue that there's tremendous financial and economic impact on families, on women and families. It's also having a huge impact on our regional, local, and national economy. So why build wealth? And it's, yes, it's important that women have jobs and their wages are increased, but we're talking about how to build assets. And a great assets, of course, is having a house or home ownership. But assets enable women to remain stable through financial emergencies. A lot of women were already in precarious positions before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. They didn't have emergency savings. They didn't have anything put away to really deal with this unforeseen major situation with the pandemic. It enables women to maintain good health, improves children's opportunities. They're able to take risks that result in better jobs or business startups. They're able to pursue higher education for themselves and their children, retire securely. And that's another whole issue, that women dropping out of the workforce is going to have a huge impact on their ability to retire. 65% of those in retirement who are poor are women. And of course, passing on security to the next generation, and also being able to participate and shape political and social agendas and live with housing security. Assets enable women to do all these things. So investing in women's wealth, like I said, is not only good for women and their families, it actually is good for our region and nation. Before the pandemic, women comprised more than half of all workers. Now that is changing because of so many women dropping out of the workforce, but at the same time, nearly half of mothers are the primary breadwinners for their families. And the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs are women of color. They are starting businesses more than any other demographic group in our country. So they are a major economic engine for our country. And yet they're being really hit hard by the pandemic and all the discriminatory practices. Parental assets are also the strongest predictors of children attending and graduating from college. This has been shown that the socioeconomic status of mothers is a huge impact on children going and graduating from college. And closing the gender wealth gap would also result in overall GDP gain of $4.3 trillion or over $13,000 per person by 2025. So empowering women is smart economics. So what is the gender wealth gap? Now, this is not, I have not changed it since the pandemic, but before the pandemic, single white women own 32 cents on the dollar compared to single white men. Black and Latinx own less than a penny, and has not improved for past 50 years. And again, we'll talk more about the discriminatory practices and how women were not able to have access to asset building opportunities. And so what are the causes? Well, women earn less than men, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Occupational segregation, fields dominated by women are paid less. They're more likely to be denied mortgages or loans or to be overcharged for them, even though they have better records of paying them back than men. They are more vulnerable to predatory lending. And those who are graduating from college, the majority are women and Black women, yet they hold more debt. 2/3 of all student debt are held by women. And occupational segregation, like I said, fields dominated by women are undervalued and underpaid and often don't have things like health benefits, paid maternity leave, paid sick leave. And they provide the majority of unpaid caregiving, which is one reason why so many women are also dropping out of the workforce. And then, of course, we'll talk about general racial disparities with respect to accessing housing. So just briefly, and I'm almost done, Women's Way, like I said, has been really focused on how do we really close the gender wealth gap. So about 4 years ago, we started the Women's Economic Security Initiative. And the purpose is to build long-term systems level collaborative centered around the shared vision that all women in the Philadelphia region attain financial well-being for themselves and their families. So this is a long-term vision, a long-term strategy, and a long-term investment. And we work with different stakeholders from all the different sectors. And it's about really trying to foster systems level learning and change and breaking down silos across organizations and sectors so we can really get at the root causes of the gender wealth gap. So since over 4 years, we have about 82 active members representing 54 organizations, and they span for-profit, nonprofit, philanthropic, and public sectors. And really critical to this is women with lived experience of economic insecurity. Those impacted by the issue the most have been at the table from the very beginning, co-designing, co-creating strategies and potential solutions. So we're going to be transitioning the WESI into the Gender Wealth Institute, and we'll be talking more about that later in the future, but it really is about closing the gender wealth gap in our region by advancing research and practical solutions that build wealth for women who are economically insecure. So now I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Woolman, our session sponsor, to introduce the panelist and moderator. Thank you. Cindy?
How's that?
That's good.
Okay, sorry about that.
No
Always a
problem.
little glitch, right? So it's my pleasure to be able to sponsor this event. Nothing gives me greater pleasure than seeing women accumulate assets. It provides that economic freedom and choice that Diane talked about. So our panelists are really going to talk about the housing industry in Philadelphia to give everyone a better understanding of what's happening. So our first panelist is Maria Gonzalez. Maria is the president of the Hispanic Association for Contractor Enterprises. As the president of HACE, Maria Nixa Gonzalez heads HACE's development team, managing over $150 million of commercial and housing development projects that have contributed to the stabilization and revitalization of Fair Hill and St. Hugh neighborhoods. Since 1996, she's been responsible for raising developmental capital and a broad base of private and public foundations and government bodies. Ms. Gonzalez, most notable achievement is the creation of a supportive community for elders through the development of affordable rental housing and the construction of a life center that provides frail elders with social and health services so they can remain living at home as long as possible. Ms. Gonzalez serves on the board of Philadelphia Planning Commission, is chair of the Community Trust Board for the American Street Empowerment Zone, is chair of the Oversight Board of the Mayor's Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity, serves on the Philadelphia Housing Trust Fund, and is president of the board of the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations. Our next panelist is Rasheedah Phillips. Rasheedah is the managing attorney for the housing policy at the Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. Rasheedah currently serves as the managing attorney of the housing policy at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. She began her career at CLS in 2008 in the Community Economic Development Unit, providing legal advice, representation, and engaging in the community lawyering on behalf of small child care, for-profit and non-for-profit organizations. She has trained on racial justice and housing law issues and skills throughout the country, previously serving as the Senior Advocate Resource and Training Attorney at Shriver Center on the Poverty Law. Rasheedah is the recipient of the 2017 National Housing Law Project Housing Justice Award, the 2017 City and State Pennsylvania 40 Under 40 Rising Star Award, and the 2018 Temple University Black Law Student Association Alumni Award, and the 2018 CLS Equal Justice Award, and the 2019 Barristers Association of Philadelphia Outstanding Young Attorneys Award. Our third panelist is Nora Lictash, Executive Director of the Women's Community Revitalization Program. Nora has worked with the Women's Community Revitalization Project, a multiracial community development organization committed to social and economic equity for low-income women and their families since founding in 1987. Working first as a volunteer and then as its director, WCRP is known for the quality, innovation, and effectiveness of its affordable housing and community development strategies, and as an organization that involves low-income women in the process of community building and self-empowerment and change. Nora is one of the founders of the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Housing Community and serves on the board of the Philadelphia Housing Development Corp, Working Families Partnership, Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations, Philadelphia Housing Trust Fund, and on the Affordable Housing Trust Advisory Council for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh. And then we have Staci Moore. Staci Moore is the Women's Community Revitalization Board Chair. Staci has been involved with the Women's Economic Security Initiative since it was started in 2017. She sits on WEISI's steering committee, is a member of the Change of the Narrative work group, and participates in the community conversation peer discussion group. In addition to her work at Women's Way, Staci has proudly volunteered for the Women's Community Revitalization Project since 1997. A woman who overcame homelessness with the help of a subsidized housing through the Philadelphia Housing Authority, Staci is now co-chair of WCRP's Board of Directors. She was appointed by Mayor Nutter and continues to serve on the city's Shared Prosperity Anti-Poverty Advisory Board. Staci served as an advisor and participant artist in the PHL Assembled Project. Her work was a part of that installation and was exhibited at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And then we are going to be moderated by our gifted moderator, Anne Fadullon. Anne is the Director of Planning and Development at the City of Philadelphia. Anne has a cabinet level position in the City of Philadelphia, and her department promotes well-planned neighborhoods with engaged residents, affordable housing options, protected historic resources, and public art. Anne has 30 years development experience in both the public and private sectors. She has developed affordable, mixed income, market rate, and mixed use projects. Anne received her Bachelor of Arts degree in Urban Studies and Economics from Lehigh University. She is a Master of City Planning degree from the University of Pennsylvania. That is our esteemed group that will be holding this event tonight, and we look forward to hearing what they have to say. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Cindy, and welcome everybody. We are really excited to have you all here this afternoon, even though it's virtually, and we look forward to the day when we can all come together and be in the same room together. I just want to say that, based on Diane's presentation, it's obvious that the situation is dire. However, also based on all those introductions by Cindy, I think it's evident to everybody that we have some amazing and incredibly talented women that are working very hard every day on trying to resolve these issues. And I think it's also clear by some of the things that Diane pointed out is that if we're going to overcome these issues, women are going to have to do it for themselves. Right? This is up to us. We're going to have to take the horse by the reins, so to speak, and we are going to have to be the change that we want to see, because no one's going to do it for us. And those in power are not going to willingly give it up because the system is working for them, but we need to make sure it's working for all of us. So with that, I'm going to turn to the panelists, and they're going to introduce themselves a little bit more, but also talk a little bit more about what their organizations do. And I also just want to say quickly before we get started that unfortunately, I think Staci Moore has been having some technical issues. And if those issues are able to be resolved, hopefully she will join us. And as soon as she joins us, when there's a little break, I will recognize her and make sure that she is able to participate fully. But let's get started with Maria.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor to be amongst such a talented group of women that are trailblazers in their own right and doing amazing work around the city. I work for ASE. I have been actually joined the organization in 1996 and became president about 7 years ago. But I feel like all my professional life I've been at ASE, and really, you know, I love the work that I do because I am a product of the neighborhood that ASE serves. ASE is located in Eastern North Philadelphia. We serve the neighborhoods of Fairhill and St. Hugh, and we're really a traditional community development corporation that our focus is really about building affordable housing for families and senior citizens, and also to rebuild our commercial corridors as a way to really have more livable communities where businesses are thriving and also creates employment opportunities for the people that live there. In the areas of affordable housing, we have created about 438 units of housing. And I preface that by saying that the majority of the housing that we provide is really occupied by women, female head of households, where I think we have about 65% of our affordable rental units that are for families that are female head of households. And about 95% of our senior housing are occupied by women. So because women are living longer lives. And we really focus in providing decent, affordable housing where our families pay only 30% of their income towards housing, because we understand that, you know, they have the population that we serve, they have very limited incomes and most of them are living in poverty. So for us, it's really important to provide decent, affordable housing that they can afford. And then we bring in the supportive services so that we can increase the amount of resources into their house so that they're able to manage their household budgets and also hopefully be able to save and achieve the next level in their life if they're so ready to do that into homeownership. We also have developed about 150 units of homeownership housing in their neighborhoods as a way to stabilize our communities and also for our families to build wealth. That's the first, you know, step that many households, because we don't have intergenerational wealth, is to be able to build wealth through homeownership. And we do that by providing a lot of support in education and pre-purchase home buying, down payment assistance, and also being able to develop housing that's really affordable, either through the rehab or new construction of housing. And we have really a pipeline of projects into the next couple of years that we hope that if we can get that off the ground, that we are able to build affordable homeownership housing in many neighborhoods that are right now in transition and being and suffering in some parts through gentrification, which really creates not a good, stability. It doesn't create stability for many of the families that we serve. And also, you know, it displaces people. So those are just some of the things that we're doing in being able to provide stability and women head of households, and also be able to create wealth in a lot of, the housing that we do provide in our neighborhoods. And also, you know, when we talk about affordable housing, it's also building assets that supports that housing through creation of trails, creation of open spaces, and also leveraging additional dollars for infrastructure, because we want to make sure that as we build a housing, that our neighborhoods are also thriving and supports the housing and the families that live there.
Great, thanks, Maria. And I'm very excited to say that we have been joined by Staci Moore. Woo! And we will get to you shortly, Staci. Okay, great. Thank you, Maria. And we really appreciate and thank you for the incredible work that ASE does. And the service, I know that you're focused place-based in a particular neighborhood, but I think, you know, there's definitely exponential effects of what you do throughout Philadelphia. So thanks so much. And Rasheedah, you are up next.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's also an honor and pleasure to be here with so many extraordinary people and to be also part of the solution, I hope. And so just to introduce myself, thank you, Cindy, for the biography. I work at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. We provide civil legal services to low-income Philadelphians across a broad range of issue areas. I manage our housing unit, which represents low-income Philadelphians who are facing evictions. We also work on renters' rights issues and other policy issues related to affordable housing and tenant protections. We do that both at the local level, the state level, as well as the national level. And our work is really involved in trying to uproot systems, the sort of systems that we all are talking about today that disproportionately harm women and in particular Black women. As well at CLS, so I serve currently in the role of managing attorney of housing policy. So as the name implies, focus primarily on housing policy work and co-managing a staff of 28 people who do a lot of the on the ground work around evictions. In addition to that, I have also served in other roles at CLS. I previously represented people who were facing mortgage foreclosure and doing bankruptcy and mortgage foreclosure defense, as well as serving in our community economic development unit, where I represented primarily women who were trying to start or maintain or grow their small child care businesses or other types of programs in the neighborhood related to child care. So really have a lot of experience in a lot of these different realms and again, at the intersections of the issues that we're talking about. And also just want to uplift that myself as a young Black person, Black woman, and mother, and a person who is currently a homeowner, former renter, former teen parent, just all of the different things that, statistically speaking, I should not be where I am, if, according to the powers that be, but that I made it, and in part because of a lot of the issues that we're talking about, and having supports that allowed me to build my wealth and build a home for my child, have a home for my child. So just want to uplift that. I also have a lot of lived experience, but again, very grateful to be here and to be able to talk about this work.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Rasheedah. And Rasheedah's selling herself short, because I think that the really vital thing she brings is ensuring that those who often have not had a voice have a voice, and that the voiceless are heard. And so we really appreciate your gifts in that regard, Rasheedah. And up next is Nora.
Okay, I have to remember to unmute. Hi, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the introduction. In addition to the things you said about me, I take out the trash at my job. So I just want to say I'm not so fancy, but I want to talk about the Women's Community Revitalization Project for a minute. But first, I just want to start with some stats. And I really appreciate the statistics that you gave, Diane, but a recent study from the Pew Charitable Trust just makes clear what Diane was talking about. In our city, there's an affordable housing crisis. Prices are going up, and it really affects women. The study showed that more than 60% of households in poverty are headed by women, and more than 90%, almost 95% of those households in poverty are housing cost burdened, meaning once they pay for their housing, there's not enough left to pay for everything else that's basic. It's not just happening today. It was happening in 1987 when a group of women who live, work, or worship in North Philly, East or Broad, started the Women's Community Revitalization Project after going door to door, talking to more than 200 women who said the greatest barrier to them was getting rental housing for themselves and their families that they could afford. In the last 34 years, that was 34 years ago, and I was a volunteer then, I'm pointing to my gray hair, 34 years ago, WCRP has built and financed and manages more than 300 homes, and we have another 100 that are either in construction or being financed. We've also developed childcare centers, healthcare centers, office buildings for nonprofits, but we don't just build buildings. We have a two-part mission, and the second part of our mission is to build leadership. And we do that by supporting the voice and the power of women, especially women in the lead who need affordable housing. When we got into this organizing or policy advocacy work, because every single time we built something, we hit barriers. And those barriers were generally policy or resource barriers. And those policies were not set by those of us who know firsthand the need for affordable housing. And we decided that we wanted to try to get in the room where these decisions were being made. And so we realized this work couldn't be done by one organization. So we joined together with other groups who shared our values and also whose constituents knew firsthand the need for affordable homes. So over the last 25 years, we've been doing this policy advocacy work or policy organizing work and coalition work. It's resulted in new city funding. It's resulted in systems working better through new institutions, and it's even required market rate and luxury housing developers to put money toward affordable housing. Our current work in this area is around land. It's a land justice campaign, and we want the city, when they're disposing of land that the city owns, to give it to groups that care about deeply affordable housing, as well as food. And it's so clear by doing this work as women, we're changed with opportunities for leadership. And so we use pretty much every opportunity we can think of to bring women into the decision-making process, because it's by making these decisions that ownership of this work begins. All of WCRP's housing design decisions are made both by design professionals as well as women who currently live in or will live in the homes, incorporating what works, what doesn't work into the designs. We set our rents and meet the needs of the lowest income families by using every resource we can find, including our own income, earned income and fees. And I just want to end with a few lessons that we've learned over the past 34 years. One is about building a community where women can be seen, heard, and share our gifts. That we need to confront inequity by building alternatives together. It's important that we take some risks and we share power, because we know organizations, just like people, learn by making mistakes as well as by successes. We think it's important to become, I'll call proficient, but really comfortable with financial investments as an organization. And these are the tools that help us become more independent and develop our leadership and help us hold power. We know that it's important to seek and develop formal membership in decision-making bodies that control resources. And lastly, we know we need to be patient and consistent, because change that endures takes decades, not months.
So let me just say, Nora also takes out the trash at home. So in the mid 80s, when I was a graduate student, part of my work study job, I was assigned to help work with a group of women at the Lutheran Settlement House who were working to start an organization called WCRP. It's now 34 years later. And Nora and WCRP have been providing me with guidance and inspiration for 34 years. And it's just amazing, not only what you do in the city of Philadelphia, but what you brought to my life as an organization has just been amazing. And I was very, very lucky to get my start there. And with that, we are going to hear from the Staci Moore.
Hi, everyone. So happy that I was able to finally get on. Once again, it really made me feel like that Saturday Night Live Zoom skit. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm just happy that I didn't get on and was like in the bathroom or something. So thank you so much for that introduction, Cindy. And thank you to Women's Way for having this discussion and for inviting me as well as us to the table. A little bit nervous because I'm discombobulated, just got off work, but I feel like I'm in such great company. Just about everybody here I know and have worked with, if not now, in the past. So I feel very, very welcomed in a great circle. Full transparency, while I am chair of the board at Women's Community Revitalization Project, I'm also volunteer, as been stated, at Women's Way for our WESI program, Women Economic Security Initiative. And having women like myself with my experience and life credentials, valuing what I bring to the table, is not a strange move to organizations like Women's Way and WCRP, and I thank them for doing this. So the reason why I got involved in advocacy at WCRP is because they welcomed me at a time after I had experienced living for 10.5 months in a shelter before being able to be placed in affordable housing. And thus, because of my experience, felt that I was not of value and really had no right to speak up. And being part of an organization that doesn't just build physical structures, but also builds upon the already existing leadership of women like myself, believing that we have leadership within us. Building upon that belief that those women with life experiences such as myself bring added value to the table. So it is because of our experiences, not despite of them, that our voices have weight and carry power. Utilizing my voice throughout the years, from wins such as establishing Philadelphia's Housing Trust Fund, so that more money is dedicated toward actually building affordable housing, as well as money for other programs within the issue of affordable housing. Also using my voice for the fight for language that speaks to affordability within the land bank, while also connecting the dots using land bank data to point to the problems of inequities within the issue of affordable housing here in Philadelphia. Learnings I picked up along the way in my walk as a housing activist is the power of coalition through coalitions such as PCAC, which is Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, learning about strategy and what it means to participate in a specifically crafted community built to take strategic action to push those in power in directions that they really may not wish to go into. So taking in those wins and thus understanding the difference between singular organization wins, i.e. the wins with people I know, versus policy wins, AKA wins for people I don't know, was very new and different for me. As well, learnings about different types of tools to get our city to more affordable and sustainable housing, such as community land trusts, which allow the built structures included in those community land trusts to remain affordable for decades. So sustained affordability, something else that was new to me, is what makes differences in women's lives, which I myself can attest to. It is what keeps us in homes so that we no longer have to uproot our families. It's what makes a difference for our children who no longer have to move from school to school. It's what allows for women to make more choices for our families, like more tools to help with our children's education or even our own education, our family's healthcare, healthier food choices, rather than sacrificing choices that we women have had to make time and again, simply because we're trying to make our money stretch for our families throughout the month, or at least until the next pay. So leading my voice in these actions for change has led to more learnings and experiences, which has further credentialized my experiences. So it is why I'm invited to participate with other organizations, but it's also a two-way street. I would not stay with an organization that is not about the work that attracted me to it in the first place. So that's why I volunteer with the phenomenal organizations that I do to learn and grow more, see more good policy for affordable housing, as well as other policies happen here in Philadelphia, and to see more women in our region moving from surviving to thriving. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Staci. You know, it's not always easy to put yourself front and center and to speak to your lived experience the way that Staci often is called to do in public. It takes a lot of courage. And so I just want to acknowledge that and also, you know, to see Staci use her voice and to become the leader that she's become, you know, just shows you that there's a whole lot of potential out there. You know, oftentimes our perceptions or what we've been told or taught about the folks that are struggling are not always true. I think, and both Rasheedah and Staci speak to if we suppress these folks, we are really losing out. We're really hurting ourselves because the gifts that these two women and so many of the other women bring to the table, we can't afford to go without those gifts, and we need them. And so again, we thank all of you for your courage. All right, let's get into it, shall we? All right. So, we've heard a lot about the barriers and the issues that women are experiencing, particularly with accessibility to housing and some of these other things. So why is it? Like, what are the issues? What are sort of the key things that we need to be aware of and maybe addressing? What are those barriers, and what do we need to be paying attention to? How about we start it off with Staci?
So you're saying, you're asking some of the barriers to affordable housing. Definitely, while there isn't enough affordable housing, truly affordable housing being built, and then there's also the flip side of more money for people who need affordable housing. But let me stress, and I know that we have, the WCRP has plenty of data about this, but we recently did like a phenomenal data piece that shows something that I had figured a while back ago. And because I volunteer with WCRP, it was just obvious to me. But this was happening years ago when our city started tearing down housing that was truly affordable, but to certain other people, it may be seen as less than. But regardless, somebody was living in those units, say at Richard Allen, or say at some other type of housing development where those developments were torn down. The problem with that is that our city wasn't rebuilding truly affordable housing for those people who need it. So if you've torn down a unit that had 200 families in it, and you're not replacing it, and what you've replaced it with is market rate housing. Like for myself, I live in a neighborhood now. I got lucky. I have a phenomenal landlord, and being a Section 8 tenant, and I no longer am, but because of Section 8 and my landlord, I had been able to stay in Northern Liberties for as long as I've been here. But I am surrounded on all sides by homes that are close to $500,000. That's not affordable to me. It's not affordable to a lot of people, workers here in Philadelphia, that can't afford to no longer live in their neighborhoods. And it's truly a shame when you read papers, white papers, and I have before, that will tell you they weren't displaced, or they were going to move anyway, or they wanted to move. And it's like, okay, yeah, you keep telling yourself that.
Anybody else want to jump in here? Maria, you got thoughts? Rasheedah, you unmuted.
Yeah, I just I agree with Staci totally about just the very lack of affordable housing that we have in a city, and growing rents, rising rents and things. But I think also I want to uplift racial discrimination and other forms of discrimination as a really huge barrier. Housing discrimination in our city is extremely pervasive. I mean, I think it goes back to racial covenants and redlining, right? We can take it back there to just the perception of a Black renter or a Black homeowner, or a Black person or a person of color seeking housing, and sort of what category they were stereotyped as. And I think that comes forward into the present. And so what we see is that having a child or being a woman of color is one of the highest predictors of who gets evicted. And also when we look at things like voucher discrimination, for example, in our region, 2/3 of landlords, based on a study by, I believe it was Urban Institute, 2/3 of landlords do turn away people with housing vouchers. And this is despite us having voucher discrimination laws here in the city and those kinds of protections. And so just thinking about the pervasive nature of housing discrimination, that it's not always intentional. It's not always about a landlord looking at someone and making an assessment and saying, I don't want that person to live here, but it's very much systemic. It's based into our system. There is no coincidence that we can tell that shows us why it is that in Germantown or in certain areas of North Philly or West Philly, despite taking income out of the situation, we still see high rates of Black families being evicted. And when you bring in disability, you bring in the intersections of people's identities and where they fall if they have marginalized identities. It just creates a really big situation where we just see housing discrimination as one of the biggest barriers to people being able to access housing that they can maintain over time. And then, the same thing with mortgages and with home ownership opportunities. We often talk about redlining as this thing of the past, but it is very much a function of today. Steering, putting people into neighborhoods where they're cut off from access to opportunities, whether that's transportation, employment, whatever it is. This is the situation that even homeowners find themselves in, or not having structures that can support elderly homeowners, support them when their roof starts to cave in 20 years from now, or maybe they don't have a family member who can take over the family home and help them to maintain it. So I think all of these different things contribute to why accessing affordable housing that people can live in and maintain over time is such a barrier, discrimination being one of the biggest reasons.
Great, thanks. And Maria and Nora, go ahead, Maria.
I just wanted to add that, yes, many landlords really discriminate, and there's a bias against women that have children. They see them as, first, that they have unstable income if they demonstrate that they're getting child support for the children. So they're less likely to rent to families that have those type of incomes. Of course, like Rasheedah mentioned, if there's any type of subsidy of assistance that woman is bringing to be able to reduce the cost of the out-of-pocket that they pay for the housing, that's also perceived as a negative because they perceive that it's unstable and they're less desirable to rent, to. In addition, women are perceived as being, because especially women with children, as being more unstable and having unstable incomes because, they're just one adult taking care of children. So they don't see them as really, a good as a good renter. So that's some of the challenges they face. And then if you are a victim of domestic violence, that even makes it more complicated because the landlords will perceive that there's going to be something bad that's going to happen down the road with the other partner that may be coming and just bringing all that, what I call drama and all that violence into the households. So those are some of the things that, why landlords tend to steer away and view women with children as not good tenants.
Nora, thoughts?
I just want to say, I think Staci and Rasheedah Maria really answered the question, but just to say again, the need is so great for affordable housing. And in terms of women and affordable housing, the organization that I work for just, with Staci as my boss, just leased up 35 homes that we built in Germantown. And within a few weeks, we had more than 700 applicants for 35 homes, and every family deserved it. Most of the families were women-headed households, probably about 80% of them. And almost all of the families were paying more than 70% of their income on their housing costs, which is just enormous. Or they were living in homes that were so substandard, or they were doubled and tripled up. So the barriers often are that it is really hard to afford the housing that's around. There's not enough housing that's affordable. So getting money in people's pockets, as Staci said, or building more truly affordable housing feels like the answer.
Yeah.
Can I just tack on real quick something that what Nora was saying? For as long as I volunteered for WCRP, for every development that we have ever developed, we have always had at least 700 or 800 applicants show up and apply. That's how great the need is every single time.
Well, thanks, Staci. So, what we often hear, right, when we all talk about, well, there's not enough affordable housing. And sometimes what the response is that we get is, well, actually, our housing isn't that expensive. It's just that people's incomes are so low, right? So let's talk about that. Is that valid, right? And then what is it about, when we saw particularly how women get paid so much less than men and the income disparities let's talk a little bit about how income is related to the housing issue. Anybody want to unmute on that one first? Come on.
I just wanted to say that's a half truth, right? Like, yes, they are not earning enough, but we definitely need more affordable housing, you know, or definitely change with the housing, change also with the housing that exists, and more affordable housing and more wages, higher wages.
Yeah, I would like to add that, you know, if yes, housing in Philadelphia is less expensive than in other metropolitan areas, but if the majority of the people that live in our neighborhoods cannot afford it, it's not affordable. So I think that, you know, that is, like Staci says, a half truth. But we definitely need to be able to bridge that divide and create more affordable housing opportunities in all sections of Philadelphia, throughout, not just in certain neighborhoods.
Nora, you want to get in here and then we'll go to Rasheedah. Go ahead, Nora.
Just for a minute, we know that the minimum wage is $7.25. So many of our tenants are working 1 or 2 minimum wage jobs. That means even with 2 minimum wage jobs, they earn less than $30,000 a year. It's unbelievable. And Philly is one of the few major cities that does not put any of its own tax dollars into affordable housing until very recently. And so as a city and as a state in Pennsylvania, we have a far way to go in thinking about what does it cost our city if we don't create affordable housing, us as taxpayers, and that we should definitely try to do that.
Go ahead, Rasheedah.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a both and problem. It's both things. Both things are equally true. And I think just to pick back up on Maria's point, like, yes, Philadelphia does have more affordable housing or cheaper rents than you might find in other metropolitan areas, but we're also one of America's oldest cities, right? And so our housing stock is very old. And so sure, there's new housing being built, but that's often housing that can't be, you know, that's luxury or market rate that can't be, that people can't afford. And then so they're renting out homes or buying homes that are old, that need a lot of work, where they're not healthy homes for people to be living in. And so you're paying extra towards your utility bills, you're paying extra towards getting repairs done. And then what ends up happening for a lot of these folks is that if they're renting these homes that have substandard conditions, they start to withhold their rent. They should not be paying for housing that they are not that's not healthy for them. And then they end up in eviction court, and then they're put into another cycle of poverty. And so this is often the patterns that we find for people, that even though, yes, our rents are cheaper in Philly, our housing stock is older, it's falling apart. And so it creates these conditions where people are in lifelong cycles of poverty.
And Diane, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to jump in here?
Yes, I just want to talk about the, livable wages, and yes, the minimum wage is horrible, and $15 an hour doesn't even cut it. I mean, it's a great change. We got to work towards that. But there's a self-sufficiency report that came out by Pathways, and because the poverty level is so old and antiquated, it hasn't been changed. For a single mother with 2 children, they said to live into Philadelphia and to pay for childcare, which is the second most costly expense beyond housing, you had to make the livable wage was like $32 an hour, $64,000 a year. If you really want, because childcare for a mother with 2 kids on average is about $1,200 a month. So it requires a comprehensive solution. We need to address all these things. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll just say for housing. So median rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia is $900. You need to make $18.65 an hour, over 2.5 times minimum wage, right? I think that, that all illustrates it's not just about get a job or get 5 jobs, right? It's that the jobs need to pay something. And again, to Rasheedah's point, we are a very old city, right? Our housing stock is no different than our bridges, our sewer system, all of that. It's infrastructure, and it's all old, and it all needs to be invested in and brought up to quality. And to add all those things together just makes it that much more difficult for folks to live in an affordable, safe unit. Okay, so we talked about that, and we talked about income, and we talked about the affordable issue, and sort of then, okay, so I have some income, and I want to start. You know, Maria, you talked about home ownership. Rasheedah, you talked about you beat every odd out there, and you're able to achieve home ownership. Let's talk about the issues that women have trying to just get credit, and what is the importance of that, and how does that come into play? Who wants to take the first bite at that apple?
So one of the things that we've seen with lenders is, you know, it's very difficult for women and people of color to really get approved for a mortgage. The hoops you have to jump through in order to be able to get that mortgage, you know, it takes anywhere between 60 to 120 days for your mortgage to be approved, and the paperwork that is required to get approval. You know, I suspect some of it has to do with artificial intelligence, the way that these algorithms are established by lenders to be able to, you know, that really determines who is a good risk versus a bad risk in some of these loans. And you saw that evident actually when Apple issued that credit card, right? Women were being turned down more often than men, even though they were making more money than their male counterparts. So you see a lot of that play out. And credit for us is critical, right? Because it affects and touches on many facets of your life, from getting a job, you know, getting you know, a rental unit, home ownership, education. So I think that that's one of the things that we focus on, in making sure that we're teaching people the best way how to build and maintain that credit, because ultimately that is one of the surest paths to be able to build wealth through homeownership and through higher education.
Anybody else want to get on that? Staci, you want to unmute? There you go.
Yeah, as Maria was talking, and just the question reminded me of a story. A friend of mine, she was trying to get a mortgage to buy a property, and she has excellent credit, mind you, and it's hard for even her. But where she went to, this particular bank, it was as if the customer service rep did not trust her and was like, I don't know, this kind of looks iffy or fishy. When she went to the same bank, but a different branch, no problem. Because like I said, she has excellent credit. So there's still those that systemic racism stuff that gets thrown into the mix. It's still hard. I think racism and gender is still hard for us as women. I'm so happy. I'm a little over half a century old, but I was not young. I wasn't even thinking right about credit when I was young. Like, I was one of those crazy people that when I was in college, the colleges all had like the tables with the credit. And I was like, what? You giving me free money? Whoops. Where do I sign? And didn't think about it until it was like, what do you mean I gotta pay it back? So, but to go back even further, but realize that it wasn't that long ago that wives couldn't have credit, right? And that if they wanted to sign up if they wanted to get anything, that was kind of like a man's world. So just those types of barriers, I feel like we've come a long way, but there's still so much left to be said, and still work to be done.
Yeah, I like to add that, you know, girls and women and young women are not really educated on how to, build credit, how to invest money, and how to financially plan for now and into the future. And that's really a detriment as to what's happening and why women are really lagging behind men in building wealth, right? So I think there's also these, perceptions that, you are the caretaker of the children and the household. So no one needs to teach you about, about credit and how to invest and how to even save for your retirement, right? And I think that, there has to be a way for all of us and all leaders to really think about how to best educate girls in how to start, that those behaviors, right? That is better when you start very young to be able to start changing your behaviors and really thinking about credit and how your whole financial house really affects your life and the type of life you want to have and where you want to live, right? And where you want to be educated. So I think that's something that I think that is, is for advocates to really start thinking about and focusing on.
I just want to give a kind of another wrinkle to this, which is, so most of the women who are tenants and leaders at WCRP earn, I would say less than $25,000 a year. And in my experience, a lot of banks come to us and say, we want to do financial literacy, or we want to help your folks, your women, learn how to manage money. And in my experience, I come from a working class family where we didn't have much money either. And this is my own experience, that the women that I know are geniuses at managing money. So I'm not talking about credit and I'm not talking about investments. I'm talking about planning for the next holiday, whether it's Passover or Easter. You're thinking about what you want to put away so your kid has something nice to wear. And you're thinking about, you have to pay your rent. And what else? How do you stretch this money? So I think there's both sides. And I think working class and poor women just have this amazing understanding. There is not enough money. And I guess if they had a lot of money, they wouldn't know how to invest it. And I didn't know how to invest it when I first came to WCRP, and we had to learn about investments and what a steady yield was. I never understood about a yield. But I do think there are both sides of this. And when women and families are really encouraged to become homeowners, before there's a deep understanding that there has to be money to fix the pipe out to the street that costs thousands of dollars, that you might look at how much money you have now and how much rent you're paying and what you would pay a mortgage, but you also need to be able to keep these homes up. And as people said, many times they're old homes in Philly. So I think there's both sides to this question.
Rasheedah, you have?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just think that all my co-panelists really highlighted the ways in which we see bias show up in our systems, both from the institutional level down to the personal level. The story Staci told about a person going into one bank and being treated a certain way, and then going into another bank and being able, so it is so pervasive how discrimination just shows up at every level and reinforces itself at all of these different levels. And so when we're looking at solutions, we really have to start from the personal to the interpersonal on up to the systemic and the institutional. And just the other thing that I wanted to highlight when we're talking about this is, aside from credit scores, there's also, for renters, tenant screening reports. And those tenant screening reports also give a score. Those scores sometimes just based on errors or wrong information, information that is not interpreted correctly, reporting an eviction that may not have actually ended in an eviction that then drops that person's score, or that tenant score says that they receive a Section 8 voucher, and then that, it can then be used as a basis for discrimination. And those tenant screening reports, though they are regulated by Federal Credit Reporting Act, much like credit reports, there are some loopholes where there is a space where it's not regulated. And so this is also a place that we're looking at in terms of where we see women, particularly in Black women, again, being denied access to housing based on eviction records or based on information that's just not correct, that's coming through these tenant screening reports. So that's another piece of the puzzle with that.
Yeah, Rasheedah, I think that's an excellent point, because one of the things we're looking at, the Biden administration, Biden ran on this pledge of a universal voucher. And he's talking about really increasing the amount of vouchers. And we talked a little bit at the beginning about the challenges that we've had with landlords being able to accept a voucher. And I think it's interesting that sometimes landlords won't accept will run a credit report and say, well, I don't want to lease to this person because they have bad credit. And you're like, but wait a minute, their rent is being paid for them. So how does their credit impact that, because their rent is being paid for them, right? And so I think you're exactly right. We need to work through those issues. And then I think, to Nora's point, that's a huge point, that it's not necessarily that folks don't have financial literacy, it's that they don't have any money, right? And it's not that if they had money, they wouldn't know how to properly use it. The issue is they don't have money. And so I think we've got to be very careful when we talk about those issues about making that distinction. And so I appreciate all those points being brought to the forefront. And I'm going to ask, go ahead, Staci.
I just wanted to tack on, because you said it brilliantly, and my landlord helped me understand it. But he, like I said, he's a really cool guy, but he was like, I don't understand why people discriminate against people who have the voucher. He was like, that's money that comes to the landlord on time every month. What's the problem? It's like, what's the problem? So it's like,
right,
live and learn.
Yeah, so we are pushing up against when we're going to take audience questions. And so I'm just going to ask the panelists one more question, because I know it's going to come up if we don't talk about it. So I'm just going to say the word, and I want you all to riff on it. Gentrification. I know you all got thoughts. Come on, let me hear them.
Woo!
The panel wants to hear it. Come on, what you got?
Woosa. So it's hard for me to not breathe. Like I said, I live in a neighborhood that's pretty much gentrified up the wazoo. I can't even think of any, like, in order for, say, affordable housing to be built in my neighborhood, you would probably have to have a very kind person who had been sitting on, say, one of the few warehouses, I guess, that remain in our area, that's just going to donate it so that it can be used for, say, torn down, and then that parcel of land used for affordable housing. But other than that, I don't see it happening. And I say woosah because I feel like I've come a long way. I used to get into like Facebook arguments with folks about gentrification. And one of the things, as I stated earlier, is that sometimes you'll have people or even institutions that write papers that say that gentrification isn't happening or that it wasn't experienced. Even my son, who now moved out, yay, what he understood from living here in this neighborhood, he went to Kearney Elementary School, which was it's still a wonderful elementary school, but all of his friends that used to live in this neighborhood have moved away. They moved away because their families either could not afford the rent any longer, or they couldn't afford their home. So it wasn't that it was just affecting renters, it was affecting homeowners too. Homeowners that lived in this neighborhood could not afford the property tax, and they had to move out. So to say that gentrification didn't happen in Northern Liberties is, for me, an affront, because I live it. Like I watched it happen over decades. None of my son's friends, none of those families, maybe one or two, still live in this neighborhood. And then also, it's weird to live in a neighborhood, and I said this once to city council, it's exhausting to live in a neighborhood that you've lived in for over decades, and you are looked upon as the infiltrator, as if you don't belong. That's a real exhausting thing, to have somebody say, it hasn't happened to me, but I've seen it spoken upon time and time again, where somebody has had the police called on them, and they live in the neighborhood, and they perhaps have lived in the neighborhood for forever, but not to the new people that have moved in. So you've moved into an urban area, but you still have your gated community or suburban mentality. And I don't understand that. I don't understand why move into an area that, as Rasheedah pointed out, a lot of these areas in our city, they're occupied by Black and brown folks because that was where our parents and grandparents and grandparents, those were the only places that they could purchase homes. They could not purchase homes in the suburbs. And so therefore, those houses, that housing stock, leverages wealth at a different rate than the housing stock in suburbia. And now the suburbanites whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents went there and were able to leverage money at a different rate are coming back, and it feels like some of them are moving into those areas, and they're displacing the people who that's the only place that they could live in the first place. And then some of the other pressures are people that are moving into our city, into these areas, who they lived in adjacent cities, New York, New Jersey. I said years ago that Center City is looking like little Madison Square, that it looks like little New York, that when you go downtown at night and you see all these lights, it's weird. And because of COVID, I haven't even been downtown in quite some time. So on the few occasions that I've had to pass downtown at night, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
Maria, I see you.
Yeah, I like to add that, you know, the Latino community initially, when they migrated to Philadelphia, we were originally, you know, lived around the art museum area back in the 50s to 60s and some part of 1970s. And
and 80s.
Yep, and 80s.
Had friends there from.
Yeah, we lived and we thrived there. And ultimately we were renters. And when a lot of development happened around the Center City area, and that area became more attractive, we were ultimately pushed out. And then, you know, moved around to the Fair Hill, St. Hugh, Hunting Park communities, Juniata, because we didn't own a part of the neighborhood. So we were forced out. And we see that being replicated in other parts of where we moved to, like South Kensington, Northern Liberties, Nora Square, areas where, again, we were renters, and ultimately we have been little by little pushed out, where now, for example, my son, I used to live around in South Kensington. If he were to move back into our neighborhood, he cannot afford it. He cannot afford to buy in that neighborhood. I think even maybe not even be able to rent an apartment in the area. And we see that, you know, being repeated again. And that's why I advocate so much for homeownership housing, because if you own a piece of the neighborhood, you are, in essence, you can, you know, build equity and have that and have the buy-in in the community. And you're not going to be pushed out like a renter. Now you can opt to sell and you get that economic benefit and, you know, enjoy it like other people do. But, you know, we see that. I'm afraid, even in Fairhill, where I work now, we're seeing parts of it being gentrified. And there's nothing that we can do about it. Because if we don't own the land, and if, you know, and we're not able to get the resources that we need to be able to create homeownership opportunities for low income people, and we have strategies as how do we can preserve, you know, affordability, then, you know, we're behind the 8 ball. We're going to be repeating the same, you know, mistakes of the past, and then ultimately be pushed out of that neighborhood as well.
Yeah, I think there's not that much that So when we talk about what we can do about it, there are policies that help to support developers coming back into our city, like the tax abatement, other policies. Those policies are passed by elected officials that we voted for, or they represent us now, whether we voted for them or not. And there are policies that can be passed to create more equity. I'm not saying that it addresses gentrification. I hear what you're saying, Maria, but it can soften the negative effects of displacement. And so that can't happen in one neighborhood. It has to happen citywide. It can't happen with one organization. But there are a number of policies that people are fighting for right now that would push the city, rather than favoring market rate or luxury developers, push there to be more equity so that folks that care about true affordability could get access to both land and resources. And those policies are things that we can win. And I think we will win if there's enough of us.
Rasheedah?
Sure, I don't have much to add, and I know we want to get to questions. I'll just say gentrification is real, as all my co-panelists talked about. However you want to define it, however you want to talk about the origin of it, something is happening. And it goes beyond just even, displacement. What I see a lot of is also cultural erasure that happens as a result of gentrification. It's the murals being covered by luxury housing. It's the fact that you can't come back to your childhood neighborhood and rent again, or so it's the fact that, they bring in a doggy daycare into a neighborhood where that's just not needed, by that community, or that the neighbors moving in don't look you in the eye when you're walking down the street, even though you've lived there 60 years, so it's these other pieces of it that really tear down a community that go beyond just, obviously the housing and displacement is important, but also when we're talking about whole communities being pushed out, as Maria was speaking to, and the sort of cultural erasure that comes a part of that, which I think impacts the whole city. It makes our city less vibrant. It really, it's not just about just a specific community or culture. It really has an impact on everyone when these kinds of things happen. So I think we really need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, great. All right, so interestingly enough, most of the questions in the Q&A that haven't sort of already been addressed by a lot of the conversation are, okay, so what are we doing about it, right? So some of the questions are like, is there an example from another city? Are there initiatives to prohibit employers from using credit as a way to screen employment applications? Are there other cities that have solved this? Is there a model? So what do we think about that? What are we working towards? What are we trying to do about this?
So I can address some of the questions that came up. Someone asked about disparate impact cases being brought around source of income voucher discrimination. So there are, in Philadelphia, we do have a source of income discrimination law that includes vouchers. And so you can, if you're facing housing discrimination, you can go and file with the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations. Philadelphia is somewhat unique in that we have a Human Relations Commission that is local and that can take those kinds of cases, but people rarely use it, often because they don't know that it exists. And often I think the problem that comes up when you're trying to use a source of income discrimination protection, when you're being denied, with your voucher, it's how quickly it can happen. You can file a complaint and be able to still get into that unit by the time your voucher expires, and by the time you have to do everything that you need to do, that unit's already gone. And so often, right, these things don't, they just need to be strengthened. Another thing that we're looking at in Philadelphia that was just introduced 2 weeks ago by Councilmember Kendra Brooks is a landlord-tenant screening policy that just says that, landlords should not look at certain kinds of evictions that did not result in a judgment, or where the tenant won, or that ended in an agreement that was resolved. Like, those sorts of cases should not be used as a barrier to prevent people from accessing housing. So hopefully folks can support that, and we can see something like that pass. And then the last thing I'll say that I think is a great solution that I know my co-panelists can speak to is community land trusts and alternative forms of home ownership that are not just about the individual, but looking at more community-based ownership options and community land control and things like that. I think is the wave. It's the wave of the past and the wave of the future. It's a solution that we need to continue to strengthen and legitimize in our city.
Nora, you want to chime in here?
Sure, and I know it's something that Maria's organization has been very involved in working on, but I guess I just want to say there are many cities that are doing things that would be great for us to replicate. But when it comes up, people say, well, it's not Philly or it's not like Philly. And some of those things are really important to do. Like in Washington, D.C., they put $100 million into the Housing Trust Fund in Washington, D.C. And we would like to see our city have more money to create and preserve affordable housing. But this idea of community land trusts and land, in order to create affordable housing, you need land that's affordable and you need some money to help subsidize your development so the rents or the sales prices are affordable. But the problem with affordable housing is that it expires. All of the programs around affordable housing end at a certain point. And those points, when I first started in this business, 15 years seemed long. 15 years is not long to me anymore. And so the idea of having long-term sustained affordability, ideally permanent affordability, is critically important. And so in Philadelphia, there are about 14 groups that are working on community land trusts. There are some community land trusts that have been around for a while. Staci's involved in one in our organization that's been around for 12 years. We've built about 80 homes. Some are lease purchase, some are home ownership, and some are permanent rental. But the idea that this is not going to disappear, that it's going to stay there, is really important. And so one piece of what we're working on right now is this idea that the city has to give first priority for groups that care about permanent affordability and community control in giving out land that is owned by our city. And our city owns 6,000 parcels of land, 5,000 of them are surplus. This land right now, there's a regulation that market rate developers can get it very easily. And we need to have first priority for groups that care about long-term, sustained, deep affordability.
Maria?
Yes, and also, I mean, there's something that's happening right now, right? City Council is working on a bond issue for neighborhood revitalization, which can include many activities and initiatives to create additional affordable housing that is rental, home ownership, and other supports for communities. So I think that, you know, having people come and testify and really advocate for a lot of those resources to go directly for creation of affordable housing would add additional units for all families throughout Philadelphia. That's really important. And also the mixed income housing bill, where I know that I believe it's Councilwoman Quinones and Gautier that are working to really have more those developments that have market rate housing have at least 20% of affordable housing, so that we have true mixed income neighborhoods and throughout Philadelphia. I think that's really important. And one last thing I would like to add as to what we can do is have more women at the table. Really talk and share, and we can learn from each other as to how to best tackle the affordable housing issue in Philadelphia.
Staci, you want in on this? We're talking about what do we do about it?
Sure. And I think that Maria's last statement was a great segue. How you affect change is when you sit at the table. Because a lot of times, and we see it, I mean, you can see it if you just watch like C-SPAN and watch our nation's politicians. You have a lot of policymakers who don't look like us, right? And so how you affect change is by getting a seat at a table. And I was a part of a panelist, I was part of a podcast, and the other woman panelist was someone who was a policymaker. She no longer is, but she is a Black woman. And she was like, and when they don't let you at the table, break their table, make your own table, do whatever you need to do. And I mean, I loved it. I love that, you know, and that's what we need to do. Like, make our own table if they don't let us at the table, and make it bigger and better. And then slam their table with our big badass table.
All right. Well, there you have it. I think that's like a great wrap up. So I just want to thank everybody. And I know, Diane, I'm going to turn it over to you. You know, when this sort of came to me to be the moderator, I thought it was going to be a really great discussion. It's been a fabulous discussion. I appreciate everybody's honesty, openness, willingness to like dig into this. And hopefully the participants got something out of it, because I think it's been fabulous. So Diane, thanks for bringing us all together, and I'm going to let you take us home.
Yeah, so thank you all. Thank you, Anne, Rasheedah, Nora, Maria, Staci. I knew this would be a really lively and really important discussion. And to those who came and listened, the reason we're doing this is, one, learn about the issues. What are the causes? What are the barriers? What are the challenges? But also, what are the solutions? You just heard some really concrete solutions here from all the panelists in terms of community-based control, community land trust, long-term sustainable affordability, right? These are things that the people need to take control of this, but it takes all of us to help make that happen. So we're going to be sending you some resources. There's articles, you can do a deeper dive in these topics, right? There's much to learn. So we're going to be sending out articles that these panelists have shared with us to learn about more about what a community land trust is, how do we really build more community-based control, and how do we get more women at the table. And so we'll be sending that out to everyone. And also, I'm going to say that right now, have more women at the table. And Staci, if you're not invited, create your own damn table, right? And it's not until we get women represented in all sectors at positions of influence and power, we're not going to see the change we want. And so we are at Women's Way are very passionate about getting women, but particularly those impacted by the issues, at the table, creating their own tables and getting them into in positions of power and influence. And Nora's been doing this forever, right? And so let's build those tables. Let's support those women building tables, learn about these issues, and please join this movement. And we're going to continue these talks. The next one is actually in June on improving the financial capability of women. And then we're going to talk about how interpersonal violence has an issue in the gender wealth gap. But I hope you learned a lot. Please take what you learned, share with others. And this is just one conversation. We've got to keep this going. This work is a marathon. So thank you all again for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I learned so much. I always do. So thank you. Good night. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank
Be
you.
well. Thank you all.
Have a great
Bye.
evening, everybody. Stay well.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.